To repeat some of the points we have already made, but in this context of an economist talking about it and lamenting the fact that these models for climate projections have been funded very heavily. Many groups in each country, like US, many groups in each country in Europe, even India is in the game, China has many groups. They're all doing these future projections as a part of IPCC assessment reports, which we think is a good thing, but where is that going? So if I wait for a second for this chopper to go by, okay, the Economist here clearly states that similar funding has not been put into supporting economic assessment of climate change. Okay, so let's keep that in mind. So here are some global nature of current and future scenarios starting from 1990. We have obviously increased in terms of annual emissions in gigatons of carbon dioxide equivalents, which are always higher than just carbon dioxide because you add methane and nitrous oxide as well. And then the future. So these were the projections starting in 2017, I think. Actually, yeah, you have to be careful where the projections start. So here are the various scenarios that were considered under the last assessment, AR5. They were called representative concentration pathways. Out of that came shared socio-economic pathways, which focused more on the impacts and how to consider them in the socioeconomics. But nonetheless, just coming back to the emissions needed to hit certain targets. So by 2020 itself, we would have to started turning down the knob and reducing emissions from this number we have hit in terms of 40 to 50 gigaton carbon CO2 equivalent to keep our goal of constraining warming since industrial revolution to 2 degrees or 1.5 degrees. And you will find many articles saying we have already shot past them in terms of the emissions that we have already created, which last for a long time. Okay, and then there are other policies that are already adopted or implemented in various ways, and where they will take us by 2100, and what the pledges and targets under Paris Agreement would give us by 2100, which means each country has to up its commitment to Paris Agreement to bring the warming down to degrees C or 1.5 degrees C pathways. Again, these are not scientific targets, but these are some kind of dangerous levels that we hopefully will not cross. If we have no policies, then we're going to go way up here in 4.1 to 4.8 degrees centigrade range, unless there's a game changer that comes across, like something that sucks carbon out of the air and starts sequestering it like crazy at a very affordable rate. Okay. What are the projections saying in terms of the impacts? Okay, again, this economist is not very happy that the various scenarios like 2.6 and 8.5. So these are, if in case you are not aware, representative concentration pathways where various assumptions are made about future policies, technologies, population growth, carbon capture and sequestration applications, renewable choices, and so on. And the 2.6 and 8.5 correspond to the radiative forcing imbalance at the top of the atmosphere. So you have energy coming from the sun and energy going out as infrared radiation, which have to balance to keep the climate at a steady state on some time scales. at, let's say, our generational timescales. 2.6 is a safe trajectory where you keep the imbalance to 2.6 watts per meter squared, which gives us a warming of about 2 degrees centigrade, and 8.5 is essentially a no policy scenario where the imbalance is 8.5 watts per meter squared. So we are currently at this 8.5 trajectory and we have to turn it down. The stippling here shows the number of models that agree with each other in these projections. Okay, there are some details, but that's basically it. So temperature is much easier to simulate by the models, given the energy from the sun and the distribution of land, oceans, glaciers, urban centers, agriculture, forests, and so on. We can produce temperature fairly skillfully. So you can see most models agree. But precipitation is much more difficult, especially when you go here. You can see that there are many regions where the models don't agree. Okay? And precipitation is very critical for, of course, water for people, water for food, and for other species, and so on. Okay, so obviously, if you're an economist and you're trying to do the cost-benefit ratios of impacts and emission reductions, then this is not very helpful. Okay, so even some climate scientists like Tim Palmer and Bjorn Stevens argue about how the model skills at local scales are not very high, and yet we are pushing very hard to claim certain things. Slightly digressing, but for an economist that becomes critical, for a modeler that becomes a challenge to reduce those uncertainties and get skill at better and better spatial scales where decisions actually get made. Nobody lives in a global mean climate, nobody lives in a global mean sea level rise, and so on. Okay, just to add a little bit more, Northern Hemisphere September sea ice extent, there are number of models run and how many scenarios they ran. For example, there is RCP 2.6, 4.5, I think 6.5 and 8.5. So not all models ran all the scenarios, and you can see that there is a multi-model average given as these lines, gray lines, multi-model average for 2081 to 2100, and there is a subset which is shown here for based on their skill evaluation and so on. So there may be no good news in terms of the sea ice over the Arctic. Economically speaking, many countries are already salivating at this prospect because you have a fast route from the Atlantic to the Pacific through the Arctic seas, but you also have lots of fossil fuel here. From the times around when dinosaurs were around, when there was no Arctic ice and there was lots of photosynthesis and biology here, which would have been buried as and converted to oil and gas by now. So obviously there are many interested parties, but their interests are not always what we think is good. Is finding new sources of gas is good. It's not good for the global warming, but it's good for the economy. And it's definitely not good if it happens because Arctic ice disappeared. Okay, so let's keep that in mind.